Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. I have a subject that I have been pondering for a very long time, and the subject is shame and guilt. Subjects that should be near and dear to our hearts because they are the favorite tools of psychopaths. If you can get somebody to feel shame over something, you can throw them off track. And once you get it thrown off track, you win the game. So the trick is, first of all, to understand what the game is. And next, how do we handle the game? How do we not get thrown off track in today's environment? And at the end, I will talk about, since they identify all this Roman business, I will go over how the Romans used shame and humiliation. So it certainly is their agenda for the rest of us. So, first, and also I'll be talking about some terms. It seems to me that social media is a big shame game, right? Everybody's always out to get somebody else. The main circle of agents on social media, all the big ones, they're always, I'm calling out this person. I had a big debate with them and they didn't win. I'm going to tell you exactly why. And then that person creates 10 videos. Then that person creates 20 and goes on to Twitter with the next 30 ones. And pretty soon they have sucked about 1 million hours of people's time. They could have been doing something else into their madness and chaos. And actually, I was thinking the other day, what does this remind me of? Well, I at first I thought, well, does this remind me of high school behavior? And then I thought, no, I didn't know kids in high school who behaved like this all the time. These people actually, maybe it's because of the hormones, because, all their agents are pretty much transgendered. So maybe it's the hormones that make them all rather petty, right? And I understand that it makes me sound petty bringing it up. But the fact is that they use shame against each other. And I believe that a lot of times they do, in fact, sue each other and stuff for the shame of it all. So what I will do is I will first tell you what a psychopath from my book had to say about shame and humiliation. And I would like to caution you this is that we are right now in a horrific society of people who have been abused a million different ways. Just because somebody exhibits what you might think of as shame or something, don't try to make yourself into a mind reader over this stuff, okay? Let's all just try to work together to first understand what it is and how we can manage through it without becoming it, right? So, and also, every minute that we become distracted by things that make us feel bad or whatever is time that really takes us away from what our objectives are for being here. We would not be here if we didn't have a lot of issues to deal with, right? Like, I consider myself a fairly flawed person because I wouldn't be here doing this work if I already knew this stuff, right? Because in the past, people have been a little bit confused and thinking that I was just telling stories about things that I already knew. No, I'm sharing my work as I go along because I don't know these things, right? So the only reason I look is because I don't know. So, so I will read you what he had to say. In my book, I've offered it to you for free. It's over on my website. I certainly would encourage you to take a look at all of your relationships, right? And think clearly as far as what do those relationships mean to you and what will they mean in the coming future. There may be some people in those relationships you might want to just gently ghost out of your life, right? This doesn't have to turn into new knowledge, turns into a new confrontation, right? You're not going through some dramatic breakup with people. Learning to look for the patterns and then navigating yourself away from those patterns so you can continue to work on what you want to work on and not be side railed by a bunch of comments and things, right? Because, for example, I didn't read the comments for the first year and a half because I knew myself. I knew that I could become possibly side railed, and then I would never continue on if I let it take me down in the beginning. So I actively did not. I mean, we were uploading primarily as a podcast on audio, but as a secondary place, we were uploading to YouTube. But I did not even go to YouTube and engage with anybody because it was a podcast and we were just uploading there, right? So I wasn't really into the dynamics of social media. So but I did clearly stay away from the comments for that particular purpose. So I believe it's good to manage things because we're in a very conflict-oriented society right now. So I try my best to avoid those kinds of conflicts, right? So because I know that as weakened as I am, I know the long-term impact will just won't be good for me, right? And it will take my focus away from where I need to go and where I want to go, right? And a lot of times it comes from people that, you meet people online and whatever, you're chatting and enjoying, but it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. You can just take inventory of how you're spending your time and the kind of feedback you're getting. Like, are people really listening to you? Are you just communicating with these people and not getting much back? So, yeah, I think now would be a pretty good time to review all of our relationships. So let me read what he had to say. I was talking to him about anger and all this kind of stuff. For example, I once reduced a girlfriend to tears of blind rage by doing the fury into calm and understanding routine by accident. What he would do is he would, if they were getting into a fight, because they don't really engage on some levels, right? But if you're getting into a fight with a psychopath, they may be just egging you along and they may just kind of lose interest in the fight. So this is what he's describing. So let me start over again. For example, I once reduced a girlfriend to tears of blind rage by doing the fury into calm understanding routine by accident. A quick blowout was normal, and with her usually lasted about 20 minutes. A full strop could last for days and be reliably set off by getting the anger levels up to a decent level and then me suddenly turning into Gandhi. It's like the same thing when you get upset over something and they will chide you and say, well, why are you being so upset? So anyway, so it's like then me suddenly turning into Gandhi. I'll keep reading and stop commenting. It's like watching two people agree to jump off something high into water, only for one to suddenly stop at the last minute. It totally throws them. That was not convenient on this occasion, but something, can't remember what, but I was in the kitchen, so it was probably the fridge, distracted me, and I forgot what I was doing. This meant I replied in a normal, life is easy, relaxed voice, and 10 minutes later, I was talking to her through the downstairs toilet door while she sobbed on the floor in there. Initially, she was going on about how could I possibly be so heartless and so apparently not care, as opposed to covertly not caring, which seemed to be the accepted norm for human relationships. But she eventually moved on to things that she could do to try to stop being such a helpless, dependent, irrational wreck. You could think of it as being supportive of someone. If you think emotionally, you will be supportive for supportive reasons. If you do not think emotionally, you can be supportive for all kinds of other reasons too. It's a tremendously powerful control mechanism because people will actually bully themselves into thinking what otherwise might take a lot of effort to convince them of. There are learned responses to supportive type behaviors, which people will lapse into when confronted by them because it is the neurological path of least resistance. They'll feel bad if they don't because their reward triggers are all set up that way. They feel unreasonable, irrational, embarrassed, ashamed. None of these things a person who had good reason to be angry would normally feel. So they can't have good reason to be angry, and the argument was their fault. They're lucky to have someone so patient and supportive as me, really. That's how they view things. So, how do I know if I'm secretly suffering from shame? Well, are you alive right now? You might manifest shame in ways like the following. When things upset you, you feel a strong urge to hide or disappear. You focus on not making mistakes or doing things that upset others. If people criticize you, you get easily offended. You secretly worry nobody would like you if they knew the real you. You hide things about yourself or have different selves around different people. You might be an overachiever or perfectionist, but never feel quite good enough. You have secret thoughts that you are a terrible person. When you get down or depressed, you might have thoughts it would be easier to die. But if you are very out of touch with your feelings and thoughts, you might have a problem with shame that shows itself in different forms of self protection, like being very defensive. Like, that's not what I was asked to do. How was I to know? Blaming others all the time, claiming you don't care about anything, deciding you are above normal emotions and problems, minimizing others' reactions to you. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. That was one quote they could say. Why do I feel so much shame? Deep shame, often referred to as core shame, stems from very difficult experiences that knock your sense of worth to the extent that you are left feeling damaged beyond repair. Most often, the experiences leading to a shame based personality stem from childhood trauma, such as a parent or caregiver who constantly criticized you, being neglected or abandoned, including emotional neglect, being unduly or severely punished by an alcoholic or addict parent, the death of a sibling when you're young, an environment of religious fanaticism, and physical abuse. In your career, shame can either affect your progress or leave you highly stressed. A small criticism from a superior about a presentation can become something you lose sleep over. A joke about your desk unkept can leave you feeling unable to connect with colleagues. And shame often leaves you with low self esteem, meaning you either don't try for the job you actually are capable of, or you work yourself overtime to prove yourself, meaning that the rest of your life lacks balance and you have perfectionist tendencies. Shame can also mean you never let yourself do well, which goes against your hidden core belief you're unworthy and flawed. The result is a problem with procrastination and a marked inability to achieve the goals you set. And a lot of this setting goals, what happens is we all get into these things. And it's like we're actively taking notes and it's like, yeah, I'm going to get this going. That's why resolutions tend to not always function that well, right? Because this is what happens to me. And I don't know how it happens to you, but I will overwhelm myself with all the things that I could see that I could do, right? Because I'm the kind of person that obviously jumps in and gets things done, right? I have a strong urge to do that. So I always have to balance that against the actual hours in the day and all that kind of stuff, right? So it has to be with how we view things. And it's easier for us to keep moving forward than it is sometimes to stop and think. And what'll happen is we'll give ourselves so many things on this list, right, that we're going to do to straighten things out. And it becomes over burdensome, right? So the only way I can function is I have to do and I've talked about this in the past, the one foot in front of the other process. Or people used to talk about alcoholics. They talk about, well, take it one day at a time, not have that drink. Well, I think one day at a time is almost too long. So when I'm really feeling stressed or something over something, I actually will take it one breath at a time because I think one day at a time just stretches the stress out for too much longer. So it becomes a sabotaging force because then everything we will view through that framework of that shame. So it becomes a problem with procrastination and an inability to achieve the goals you set. So actually what happens is again, shame can also lead you to friendships with people who don't acknowledge you or treat you well, or relationships where you feed into others' needs and avoid your own. So it can also work that way, that a person who feels a lot of shame and had a lot of things in their own past will feel a tremendous amount of compassion for people they see that might be in that same position. So they will move heaven and earth to become a caretaker of others, for example. And all that time they will devote caretaking everybody else, but never leading back to their own heart for caretaking. So there's ways that we work these out. And I've gone through all of this myself. I went through a few years of just absolutely rabid animal rescue. I did that for years, and yeah, and you have to learn to you get so thick into it that you're not even thinking about what happens. Can any of this stop, or can any of this get changed? Because you set yourself on that treadmill, and once that treadmill's going, you start keeping that treadmill up with the other treadmill, which is what you do for your work and stuff. So now your hobby of helping other pets while you're still working and stuff, now you start to get two treadmills going, right? So, and while you're operating on those treadmills, it's important to, get enough sleep. Number one, that is 100% how our bodies restore themselves. So, I think it's important to realize that also leads us to the path of people who don't acknowledge you or treat you well, or relationships where you feed into others' needs and avoid your own. Because, see, that's the big one for me. I don't know what it is for you, but that would be something that I would certainly suggest thinking about because it's a big one for me. It is always kind and caring people are the absolutely perfect targets of psychopaths. And they know how to feed into our kindness. And that's why you hear these people always talking about we got to protect the children. When all along they're actually murdering the children, right? They're setting the children up for sexual abuse. They're setting the kids up. While on the other hand, the lens they want you to see them through is that they're great protectors of children. So they feed into things that they know that we're deeply concerned about. They know that, like, for example, this is a good example in California. Obviously, people sleeping in tents all over the town upsets a lot of kind and caring people, right? And they're the kind of people who vote to give them more money to help these people. And what happens then? Well, it all gets robbed, right? But that is how a problem like the homeless can continue on for over and over because it's not like there aren't good people out here who care, okay? It's just that our caring can lead to their abuse. So we care a lot about the homeless, so we let them actually abuse us by lying to us, taking our tax funding and never doing anything about it. So it is a pretty big thing to pay attention to because it is easy to go from one swing of the pendulum all the way to the next. Trust me, I'm the person who could have written a book about this stuff, okay? So when does shame become harmful? Shame can be problematic when it becomes internalized and results in an overly harsh evaluation of oneself as a whole person. The inner critic might tell you that you are a bad person. Shame is a feeling of embarrassment or humiliation that arises from the perception of having done something dishonorable, immoral, or improper. People who experience shame usually try to hide the things they feel ashamed of. That's why most people don't report rape because people feel shame over rape, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, right? But when you look at the entire system, it's easy to see how they would feel shame because when they go to report the rape, maybe the cops laugh at them. So there's lots of ways that they can reinforce shame by a dysfunctional system. When shame is chronic, it can involve the feelings that you are fundamentally flawed. Shame can also be hard to identify in oneself. When shame is a negative emotion, its origins play a part in our survival as a species. When does shame become harmful? Shame can be problematic when it becomes internalized and results in an overly harsh evaluation of oneself as a whole person. This inner critic might tell you that you are a bad person, worthless, or have no value. The truth is, how deeply you feel shamed often has little to do with your worth or what you have done wrong. Other common concepts that overlap with shame include embarrassment, humiliation, and guilt. The truth is, however deeply you feel ashamed, oh, I already just said that part. Okay. What are the symptoms of shame? Feeling sensitive or being worried about what others think of you. Feeling unappreciated, used, or like others take advantage of you. Feeling rejected, regretful, inadequate, or like you have little impact. Uncontrollable blushing or being afraid to look inappropriate or stupid. Worrying that you aren't treated with respect or wanting to have the last word. Feeling that you can't be your true self, losing your identity, or not sharing your thoughts or feelings because you are afraid to be embarrassed. Being more worried about failure than doing something immoral or dishonorable. I don't know if that makes sense. Being more worried about failure. Oh, being more worried about failure than doing something immoral or dishonorable. Feeling like an outsider, that you are different or left out, or feeling suspicious and like you can't trust others. Being a wallflower or shrinking violet, wanting to shut people out or withdraw, trying to hide or be inconspicuous, or not wanting to be the center of attention. Um, so those are some of the symptoms, but I believe a lot of these things originate. And I think the way that we can be tricked by these psychopaths into feeling shame starts from our trauma. Trauma is any type of distressing event or experience that can have an impact on a person's ability to cope and function. Trauma can result in emotional, physical, and psychological harm. Many people will experience some kind of traumatic event, from the unexpected death of a loved one at some point in their lifetime. However, not all people will develop post-traumatic stress disorder after a traumatic death. And I've done some shows about PTSD and being with psychopaths, but actually PTSD are actually very common after traumatic events. They make it sound like it's extraordinary. For example, I created the first forum for victims of psychopaths years ago, and one of the things that victims would talk about was that when they would try to talk to their friends about this relationship they were in and they were suspicious that it was with a psychopath, people always discount other people. We have very poor listening skills when it comes to each other. And that's just an overall observation, right? So what they would hear would be things like this. Well, if he really is a psychopath, you're really lucky because he could have been like Ted Bundy and you could be dead right now. So there's a way that our experiences can also live on through trying to describe this event to others who we think are close to us, and their reaction to it, right, can almost be kind of re-traumatizing to a degree because it doesn't provide us with any kind of support system. And what do I mean by a support system? Not somebody who's got like a lot of Kleenexes and want to listen to us cry, but somebody who will truly listen to what you are saying and not jump in the middle with things like, oh, you're lucky you're alive because Ted Bundy would have killed her by now. So it can be brought on by trying to heal from our trauma. You see what I'm saying? So um, I think that trauma comes in many, many categories. And I think that the people in charge um, are working overtime to make sure that we have as much trauma in our lives, right? And all these people that are in credit card debt now and stuff, that's all going to be shamed. And I'll be talking about that toward the end there. But anyway, so here's some common reactions to trauma: intrusive thoughts and memories. After a traumatic event, it is common to experience some intrusive thoughts and memories of the traumatic event. I could get an A in this category. This is especially likely to occur when you encounter something that reminds you of the traumatic event. Hypervigilance. It is also very natural to feel more on guard and aware of your surroundings after a traumatic event. This is actually a very protective symptom as your body is attempting to keep you safe by making you more aware of potential sources of threat and danger. This natural safety mechanism is going to be more sensitive following a traumatic event. Hyperarousal. Just as you are going to be likely be more on guard, you are also likely going to feel more keyed up and on edge. Yeah, I'm good at this one. Following a traumatic event. This is again part of your body's natural protection system. Fear and anxiety tell us that there is some kind of danger present, and all the body sensations that go along with fear and anxiety are essentially designed to help us respond to that danger. They're preparing us to flee, freeze, or to fight. Following a traumatic event, your body's alarm system is going to be more sensitive in an attempt to protect you from future traumatic events. Feeling unsafe. After a traumatic event, our assumptions about the world being a safe and secure place are understandably shattered. Consequently, people may feel as though any situation or place is potentially dangerous. Places or situations you once felt secure in may now feel threatening and may be anxiety provoking. This is especially likely to occur in situations or places that remind you of your traumatic event. And also, others at inappropriate times will bring back these ideas to you, right? People that can be a little passive aggressive. For example, let's say you're out and you're actually having a decent time and you just gone through this horrible trauma in your life, right? And your friends know about the trauma, but you're out, you're trying to do your best to, put on a pleasant face and all that. And while you're just talking about random things and catching up on things, that one person will come up and say, how are you doing about the death of your so and so? See what I'm saying? And just like drag you back into that whole thing. So, yeah, it can feel like, yeah. And remember, people that make those kind of comments could either be highly traumatized themselves and totally unaware of what they're doing because people don't take enough time to breathe these days because there's so much energy around being on social media that they may not even recognize what they're doing. But what I do at this stage is I'm not here to become a counselor to the world, like I said, or run a cult. So I just take a look at things and think, well, this isn't going to work out for all kinds of reasons. And none of these reasons have to do with any kind of explosive discussions or anything like that, because, you may not appreciate that comment. It may have thrown you back terribly, and you may make a decision at the time just not to respond to it. So then later, what's your reaction going to be to the person who set you up that way? Well, take a look at your whole relationship. Don't look at everything as being a big breakup. there's a lot of times that it's totally appropriate to do kind of what I call a progressive ghosting. I have no desire to get into a big back and forth with somebody that I barely know. That's barely important to me when I'm doing on the game board, right? So it is very easy. It is much easier to get sucked into that kind of stuff than it is to gently and silently ghost yourself away. Because the thing is, what I learned, I went to a couple of Zen classes when I was in California, groups, and this one woman, she was really good. The other one was a total nutcase, but she was really good. And um, she really taught about being in the present moment. And when I find myself in this fight or flight kind of mode, I immediately bring myself back to my breathing, shut it all out, and just focus on my breathing. Because if you can catch the spin before it starts spinning, you're going to be better off. And what she taught me was that when we decide to abuse ourselves, it's only a matter of what size bat we pull out of our arsenal. So I try to be conscious, knowing that I'm going to have these reactions, right, for all those other reasons. So the only way I can deal with it is by myself internally, right? I can't get everybody in the whole world to respond to how I want them to respond to. So I can only deal with how I respond to it. And rather than letting myself spin off into the ether, I absolutely have to bring myself back to my breathing and try to start from there all over again, because it could be it could be intentional, these comments, or it could just be out of ignorance. It could be a whole bunch of things. So you have to decide what is good for you, right? And what is good for you is what should be at the very top of our minds, right? So I'm going to put this on hold for a second. I think I'm just about wrapping up here. Let me see here. And there's a few more things I'd like to go over before I close off here. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Okay. Um, Self-compassion involves becoming attuned and attentive to inner wants and needs rather than always putting the needs of others first. Well, I mean, unless you have children or a spouse, okay. We have some very selfish thinking. And when you read some of these therapy things right here, you have to kind of weed out the stuff that they've planted into our brains, right? Okay. In addition, self compassion teaches people to be more accepting of themselves by interrupting their inner critics with a gentle and understanding voice. Maintain this positive self talk even when you make mistakes or feel insecure. So, why do they what it is that I think because of our class system in this country or around the world, right? Um, they consider us people that should be shamed, right? They have typical words for us: come out, the masses, the rabble, the riffraff, the plebeians, and the unwashed masses. And I think all of these things play into our shaming of ourselves. They use the term unwashed masses is usually in a negative way or derogative way, meaning the people who are considered to be uneducated, uninformed, or inferior by the speaker. They are always that now they talk about us and refer to us as the working class, like it's some sort of a disease or something, right? I hear them say this all of the time. The way they speak about us is very alarming, and that it may not seem like it until you really think about it, okay? But when you're always referred to as, let's say, the working class, like you're not good enough, right? Your dad was just a worker. My dad is an executive. It puts us into these splinter categories, okay? And it makes one good and one bad, right? And if you notice, The ones they always call the good categories come from the rich people, like, right? Like being rich is now all that is perceived as being good. So if you get to be rich and model these other people's behavior, then all of your problems will go away and everything will just be terrific, right? That is, if you're willing to walk over the backs of everybody else exactly like these other people are doing. So people start to feel shame about money and then they start to feel like, well, I got to get some of my own. So it creates a really kind of a insane system, right? And then they look at us as we are less than. So they set up this scenario that nobody can ever really make money, right? Because they either steal it all or cheat it from somebody, right? So it just is an interesting dynamic to think about because they are, in fact, our abusers, right? So I just find it odd how kindly people speak about them and, talk about having crushes on them and say, oh, I just love that show. You know what I mean? So they're not in our class, but then yet we want to be in their class. Yeah, it's something to really think about. I'm hoping that today's show is just to open up to think about things, right? And not in any kind of punitive way. So the Romans had this way, I'll close off with this. They had this way of punishing people to humiliate them. And interestingly enough, crucifixion was one of the most brutal and painful execution methods utilized by the Romans. Perhaps the most shameful and painful way to be executed in ancient Rome was through crucifixion. Again, you would not suffer this punishment if you were a Roman citizen. That is why St. Paul was beheaded and St. Peter was crucified. Crucifixion, and this isn't too gross, okay, was carried out in several ways because remember, they write this story, okay, and they seem to want to write this story about the Romans, right? Crucifixion was carried out in several ways on different shaped crosses. In general, the prisoners were stripped naked and nailed by their wrists to the wooden crossbeam. This meant that the whole body weight of the prisoner was supported only by their arms. Yeah, I never could understand that how they got Jesus up there because it would seem like the nail. I don't want to get gross, but I never thought that I would look into learning about crucifixion. So here we are, right? So, but that was always my thought about Jesus is how do you nail somebody up to a cross? Do you nail it on the ground or do you nail it on the ground and make it stand up? But then when you make it stand up, how do you keep the nails in between? Okay. So, in general, the prisoners were stripped naked and nailed by their wrists to the wooden crossbeam. So, they were only supported by their arms, which would soon lead to excruciating pain. It wasn't uncommon for the individual shoulders. It wasn't, yeah, but see, okay. It wasn't uncommon for the individual shoulders and elbow joints to dislocate. Over time, this position would also make it difficult to breathe properly. Um, the whole, and this is because they use humiliation as a way to control us. Okay, so that's why we're talking about the Romans. The whole point of the spectacle was to serve as a warning to the public. That's why whenever they talk about these coups and stuff, they always talk about, well, they went in and they murdered 10 people and then nobody stepped forward after that. Pretty easy to keep a population of millions of people online. And supposedly you just haul a few of them in, murder them in the town square, and everybody else kowtows down. Now, why is that? Well, I think it's because everybody seems to believe that this is the only life that we have, and this horrific fear of death drives people to do these things. Okay, I'll finish. I'll finish talking about crucifixion here. Um, it could be several days for the condemned man to die on the cross. The whole point of the spectacle was to serve as a warning to the public. Each crucifixion was prolonged, painful, and humiliating. In many cases, the corpse would also be left on the cross to be picked clean by carrion birds, thus ensuring that the unfortunate victim did not receive an honorable burial. In general, death from crucifixion could occur as early as a few hours or as long as 4 days. I wonder who figures this stuff out. One of the historians. Aside from extreme, I think it's hemorrhaging and dehydration, the most common cause of death was due to multifactional pathology. This included hypovolemic shock, cardiac arrest, and progressive asphyxia caused by impairment of respiratory movement. Now, isn't this what we're going through now? So this is their favorite thing, right? And I would have to say, all these people with respiratory diseases. So when you get hung on the cross and crucified, this includes hypovolemic shock, cardiac arrest, progressive asphyxia caused by impairment of respiratory movement. And remember, I've been talking about that JN on this new thing. It seems suspiciously to me to mean Jesus of Nazareth. So yeah, I think this is pretty interesting about this crucifixion thing, right? It bleeds into what they're up to today. That's why I'm always saying, look to the beginning. As the Roman guards could not leave the site of the execution until after the condemned had died, they sometimes hastened the prisoners in by breaking their legs with an iron club. People are just always kind to the end now, aren't they? Prisoners would often be crucified in great numbers after a period of civil unrest. After a slave rebellion led by Spartacus, of around 6,000 of his followers were crucified between Rome and Capua. When Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, more mass crucifixions were carried out to ensure that dissidents understood the Roman authorities would not tolerate their rebellious acts. According to scholars, the Romans perfected crucifixion for 500 years until it was abolished by Constantine in the 4th century AD. Why were Roman executions so brutal? For the ancient Romans, capital punishment was a method of maintaining, albeit brutally, their social order and empire. If you were fortunate enough to have been born a Roman citizen, you could probably assume you would be treated with respect and dignity if you committed a crime. But if you were a slave or prisoner of war, you could expect to have the full force of Roman law and authority thrown at you. Although this was done for multiple reasons, the intent remained largely the same. By implementing these brutal forms of capital punishment into their society, the Romans ensured that anyone disobeying the law was met with swift justice. Likewise, it also showed the masses that rebellion or crime would not be tolerated. Well, I think we're working in some sort of Roman Coliseum right now, personally. All these sports games and stuff. Taylor Swift is dating a football guy. They're all transgender, So, yeah, we're living in this. I think the final days of Rome or the United States, we're living in this big circus tent. All kinds of stuff going on, right? People are all confronting each other all over the place. They're talking about race riots and all. It just seems like it's just one big deal. And it also, this is a part that I've been trying to be more aware of. So, Sometimes when we engage in hopping into the comments and those kinds of things, is that it actually is living off the pain and shame of others, and that's engaging ourselves in the humiliation. Try to always punch up and not down is my motto, okay? And when you do start to take charge of things for yourself, like let's say that somebody has said something to you that's totally not true, if you decide to defend yourself, just stick to the point. And what you will find, there will be a lot of effort put into getting you off of that point, right? And I can pretty much guarantee you that 98% of the time, that person will walk away and consider you to be the biggest asshole they ever met. Well, that's how they're going to protect their first act in the first place, right? Because they did something squirrely in the first place that you went to talk about or something. And their reaction to it is to try to get you shamed so that you won't say anything anymore with things like, well, you always do things like that. So to turn it around quickly onto you. What that also should be showing us is that person is very skilled at deflection, right? And maybe not somebody in our inner circle, because right now is going to be a big challenge. And I think that we should all give ourselves a big pat on the back because for anybody who's made it through this trauma landmine of the game board should be proud of having gotten here. And I'd like to remind you one more time, shame and money intertwined. Why do you think they give away all these credit cards? Why do you think they give everybody cars they can't afford? Because they know they can shame people into giving that money back, right? And in most cases, that money does not have to be paid back. And what they will do is they will harass you so much that the shame will make you retreat and not do anything else in your life because you'll be so focused on that. And if you're older, or if you have any kind of disability payments you're receiving, like SSI, or if you have any kind of capacity issues, right, or older, I put the link to them down below. It's called Helps Law Firm. What they do is they're a nonprofit, won't cost you anything. They will get between you and the bill collector. The main point here also is I don't even, like I said at the beginning, I think this one day at a time thing is too far out if you're certainly having issues. I go hour by hour or breath by breath, depending on how I'm doing that day. Put them into not only bite-sized pieces, when you take a look at things and think, oh, I'd like to deal with these things, get an overview in your mind, put them into not only bite-sized pieces, but nibble-sized pieces that you can take tiny little bites off of at a time. Because then once you start to feel a sense of accomplishment over those first few nibbles, then you will feel more motivated to continue. And like in all other things, go gently. Don't pull out that club and start whipping yourself on the back, because we're all here to learn. And if we weren't flawed, I don't think any of us would be here. So we have to focus on what cards do we have in our deck right now. It looks to me like things are going to be starting to get kind of crazy here soon, right? I mean, the bombing in Yemen and all this stuff. So I don't know. I would caution against even when I'm scanning around. For example, I'll be looking into what's going on with the migrants in New York, right? Well, if I tune into a channel for a minute when I'm scanning around, if they start talking about negative things toward the migrants, I just walk away. Okay. I don't stop in the comments and start complaining about it. I go away. Or so if I find a channel that's talking about them in an appropriate way, that's where I put my energy, right? So I think the first step is it's almost like you got to kind of like back away one small step at a time, because you don't need to make any sudden moves and keep people saying, oh, you're different. Why are you changing? You're not changing. It's just a matter of, for me, it's a matter of adjusting to my life on the game board. Because, like right now, I physically cannot handle any type of confrontation, nor do I want to. I look at it and I think, nah, not worth punching down over, just not worth it. Besides, it never makes me feel good because I don't know why that person reacted that way. I'm not a mind reader and I'm not a cult leader. So maybe they're reacting that way because they're so horrifically pained and traumatized themselves. But you know what? The thing is that I don't mean to sound like you then just carelessly move past you, but all I'm saying is when you pick a plan, it's important to stick with it. So I have this saying that the longer we go through life painting red flags white, the more complicated it will be for us. So the goal is to stop painting red flags white. Acknowledge that it's a red flag. Notice what it did to you. Start living in the present moment and then move on later. It doesn't require an immediate reaction from you, because if you're in a vulnerable position, an immediate reaction is not going to be your best one. So with that, I will bid you goodbye. Be safe out there, and goodbye for now. And remember, it is an honor that we're here, and it's also a privilege to be in support of each other. So that is how I look at things. And thank you very much for joining me today. So goodbye for now, and be safe out there.